Hello, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple of seconds to let folks join. Welcome, welcome. You're here for Coach Chat with Cynthia and Paula.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining.
Hi. Hi, Gina. Awesome. Okay, we're gonna get started. Just give it a couple seconds more, and then we will.
You want to jump right into intros, Paula? Okay, I'm going to stop this.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Paula Edgar, and I am the CEO of PGE Consulting Group, which is a professional development and diversity, equity, and inclusion training and consulting firm. I am also an executive coach. I coach and train and pretty much do everything through the lens of inclusion, with the understanding that sometimes people don't want to go into spaces that are called specifically diversity focused, and understanding because of that, that I say everything I do has diversity in it. So it doesn't matter, you're going to be in a diversity training if you're in a room with, or Zoom with me. And I'm so excited to be here today with Cynthia Pong. Cynthia.
Oh, thanks, Paula. And that's right, there's no opt-out with us. It's pretty much permeates everything we do and say. So hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia Pong. I'm the founder of Embrace Change, which is a coaching and consulting firm. There's overlaps for sure with what Paula does. With our coaching, it's specifically for women of color and people of color. And our mission is to get all people of color, especially women of color, the money, power, and respect that we all deserve. And then with the consulting and the institutional side, we partner with mid-sized companies and organizations that are actually and truly genuinely invested in their people of color succeeding and thriving in their org. So that's a bit about me. I wanted to share a little bit of, before we get into it, a few, of course I can't find the, I think this is it. Of course I can't find the slide. Here we go. Do you all see this?
Yep.
Yeah, so a couple of things for today's time and space. Use the Q&A. You should have a Q&A button to pose any questions, and we'll take questions at the end in the last 10-15 minutes or so, and use the chat to share any responses and engage with each other. Please know that if there's anyone engaging in any oppressive behavior or comments or language, they will be removed from the event. So thank you for understanding that. Paula, do you want me to share you don't need me to share that question bit.ly at this point, right?
No, not yet. Nope.
Okay.
So the only thing I'll add to the logistics is that if you are in the chat and you want to chat with everybody, then you have to make sure that you have it toggled down in the chat to go to everyone as opposed to just the host and panelists. We welcome you to engage however you feel comfortable, but if you want everybody else to see where your comment is, make sure that you use that. And then as Cynthia mentioned, Q&A at the end, but you can put a question in whenever you'd like and we'll respond to it at the end of the session. So the conversation that we're going to have is specifically about why companies and how companies fail people of color. And the question that, I shouldn't say the question, but something that I want to talk about before we even get to that is the fact that we couldn't be inclusive spaces without talking about the fact that we are in a place of trauma right now, right? Yeah. Globally, there's violence happening in an extremely profound way. And also, we are still in the middle of a pandemic. That in all of those intersections and including, but not limited to, my lawyer hat on, all of the other things that individually, organizationally, societally we are facing right now, make this a really hard time to navigate. And in saying that, we want to make sure that you understand that we are in a space of empathy with both each other and with you. And I want to started with that before we jump into really more of that, right? Really more talking about how that impacts specifically what we're going to talk about.
Right.
Just take a deep breath. Gina's on, so I have to practice my meditation, my mindfulness.
Totally.
But trust me when I say I have been breathing deeply in a really profound way for the last few weeks, and especially today. Because it's a very painful and traumatic time that we're all navigating. So if we're talking about communities of color and we're talking about the workplaces, let's think about the last 2 years. What do you think might have gone on in that time? A lot, right? You think about 2020 in particular, everything, people, you know what, I shouldn't say that. People will always say, well, in February, everything was fine. It wasn't fine, right? We still had societal issues, but as soon as we got to March, the pandemic hit. And then in May, George Floyd was murdered. Prior to that, being honest, we had so many things. And in the time between 2020 until now, we've gone through so much politically, social justice wise, impact on many different communities and in terms of the pain that they have been suffering. And our collective awakening, as well as collective trauma around that, has been a lot. And so that's just us, like, just talking about it on this, right, on this webinar. But then when we started to brainstorm about what we wanted to talk about and collaborate on, it really stemmed from the fact that a lot of organizations are thinking, well, even though all of that's happening, if they're even acknowledging it, everything should be fine. We should be able to retain folks. Everything is a best practice. And it's not, right? It is not, in nowhere near that. And in fact, we should be paying special attention to people and places in that intersection of not just being workers, but being workers who identify as people of color, because their experiences have been profound in the past 2 years and before that as well. What do you think about that, Cynthia?
I mean, 100% to everything that you just said. And I'm glad that we have kind of laid that out as the context, the bigger context that we're all in. And I think it's easy in the day-to-day because, we're often rushing from meeting to meeting to really forget that. And that's exactly the times where, folks of color get lost kind of, or they're marginalized or they're excluded or, erased and things like that. So, I'm actually kind of curious what the audience has seen in their organizations and companies as far as like what they might have tried to support their staff of color. So I believe we have a poll that we wanted to launch real quick and kind of get a sense of what strategies and solutions people have tried, because that is what we are ultimately going to get to talking about today within the larger context that Paula just laid out. And while that happens, like, I also want to say that obviously one of the things that we've been, or maybe not obviously, I'll take that back, but one of the kind of buzzword topics that has been going around the last couple months, especially, is the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle or the Great Revolution, as Paula, I believe you call it. So whatever you call that, there has been so much movement in the working world, and a lot of people of color have been moving because they're fed up with being ignored, with being unseen and unheard, with being overworked and underpaid and undervalued. It's become such a pervasive, and Asha says in the chat, the great fed up. Exactly. It's really permeated for so long, and how people have been treated, especially post and during pandemic and post George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, has just made things so clear, I think, to a lot of people of color. They're just like done. And why are they still having to fight for the promotions that they deserve, to be paid equally, to be given the back pay that they're owed, to be given the respect in the projects and the leadership roles that they deserve? Why now still, right? Meanwhile, we're still being like gaslit by our bosses and institutions, being told we're not leadership material, or that the problem is us. When we point out, like, I just had this happen with a client yesterday who told me how she's been fighting and trying to raise the fact that her institution is so problematic when it comes to DEI and B. And they're telling her that she's the problem. She's finding out that her supervisors and colleagues are being asked, is she rude and problematic and a troublemaker?
Wow.
Yeah. So, and she's Afro-Latina and faces quite a lot of discrimination, also xenophobia and stuff like that. So in any event, that's some of the additional context that's happening. So let me actually try to launch this poll and see what folks say. Let's give a couple of seconds for people to put that in there.
That's being launched and folks that participate. I just want to address something in the chat. Lucic, I thank you for bringing that up. Generally, what has happened in the past is that folks who need accommodations have let us know, and I apologize that we did not ask expressly. And we'll make sure that once we put the recording out, that we do also have the transcript, which I know it does not necessarily respond in full to what your request is, but thank you for bringing it up. And we will definitely know that for next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. So yeah, let's give maybe a few more seconds for people to respond. But so far, a lot of people have done the professional development on DEI topics. That's the kind of the leading solution that's been tried. Fewer have done, say, the external third-party audit. So I'm going to end the poll in a moment. So put your votes in. Thank you all for doing this. Okay.
This is interesting.
Yeah. There's still some shifts happening. So, all right, I'm going to end it now. All right. So hopefully, can folks see the results right now?
Did you hit share?
I think so.
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks.
So this is cool. We've got 15% say pay transparency, like sharing salaries within a company, 45% flexible work conditions, like work from home, remote work, flexible PTO. 35% have developed individual professional development plans. 60%, that's the leading one, professional development on DEI topics. 35% supporting POC ERGs with at least 4-figure budgets. 15% executive or career coaching for POC employees. 10% external third-party audit of workplace experience, and 15% clicked other. Oh no, I'm super Asha that the poll didn't go through for you. Agana has also said being the only person of color in the office, which is I mean, that's a whole seminar in itself of how difficult that is and all the issues that one has to face being that the only. But Agana says having to be proactive and searching out opportunities that benefit you. And Stephanie pointed out there's a formal mentoring program and a new affinity group. So I don't know, what do you think of these results, Paula?
I mean, I think it's what I see, a lot of the work that I do, I'd say probably 75% of the work that I do is with lawyers and law firms and legal organizations. And definitely the lack of focus on professional development and the strategy around that. But just in general, not having a strategy, right? Or the strategy being, we could have had 17 different options here, which is really why I wanted to see what folks were saying in the chat, because, best practice around this is to make sure that there is some kind of practice happening. And I was not shocked that someone said that we haven't done anything about this at all, because it has not necessarily been as prioritized until, like we were talking about at the beginning, the last 2 years, right? I tell folks that the thing that I hear the most when I have calls with clients, potential clients, is in the wake of George Floyd or post George Floyd. I hear that pretty much every single day. And I always think to myself, yes, that was for us all collectively a reckoning. But what about before?
Yeah.
What about previous to that in terms of wanting to recruit and retain, develop and elevate people of color in your workplaces? And it just seems like now there was this focus, but in this way that was just kind of, I'm happy for whenever the realization comes, but to me, it's like, do we have to go this far in order for there to be this understanding? And now then what are you doing? Some people will say, well, we started, a group, and the question is, what has that group done? Who are the executive sponsors within that group? Does the group have the ability to sort of make change, or is it again a place of sort of quieting folks by giving them the opportunity to convene? There's a lot. And so my thought about this is that this cannot be and it has to be a part of your core strategy in order to be
right. And we talked about that in the sort of teaser event that we did on LinkedIn Audio in January, about how It can't be siloed into some other extra space and treated like it's a bonus thing, but has to be fully integrated into everything. Otherwise, you're going to have massive gaps between the professional development on DEI topics that you are doing and the actual day-to-day experience of your employees of color. So, you know, it's no wonder that people are leaving the second that they can find some type of other option. And now that people are going to the other places, there's also a retention issue on that end too, because now it's been a little bit of time. So it's on both sides of this.
Well, I want to add something else there too, because, you know, when you think specifically, and we ask specifically about professional development around DEI topics, right?
Mhm.
It's in order to provide an understanding of, you know, of baseline knowledge, you know, the way in which we are
Yeah.
talking, what terminology should be used, what are the ways in which we navigate with each other, right?
Yeah.
That in specific helps to mitigate the impact, the detrimental impact on people of color in the workplace, right? If you understand that people of color is even a term, right? If you understand what bias is and microaggressions are and their impact, that part of that professional development for everyone is an important piece of making sure that that foundation is there of inclusion to build on whatever strategy that you have. And what I find is that when you're not focusing on that, when you're not incorporating that, then you have people experiencing those additional pieces of microaggressions that are continue to happen, or the lack of understanding why it might be even important, or understanding the full strategy, which, you know, and for law firms and organizations I work with, it's not just internal, it's how it impacts the perception externally as well.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I know that sort of the brand reputation or that type of thing is so important. And like, it's also why organizations and companies need to pay really good attention to when people do leave. You don't want people leaving and then going on Glassdoor and all the online forums to basically share what it's really like on the inside. That comes back to your bottom line and your shareholder reports and all that stuff too.
You're talking my talk now, because I always say we are in the Yelp world, right? And we don't go to Yelp to be like, I had the best burger. We go to say my burger was cold and I'm mad. And Glassdoor provides that opportunity, but also there's so many other group forums. Yeah. This is where, you know, you hear people say, well, don't go there because this is my experience. Or you know, they might say that they're committed because on their website, but ask this question during your interview. I just saw that the other day. It was on Twitter where this person was like, if you're going to work at this place, ask these questions. And I thought, look how empowered people are now. Like, that's why I call it the great revelation, because you realize you don't have to be stuck in spaces that do not foster your professional development, that don't foster and make value you. And that says that you have agency. And before, people felt collectively as if they weren't able to navigate, right? They didn't have a choice in spaces, especially if you were being paid well. And it's like you get paid well in order to kind of sit here and not necessarily speak up and talk about the fact that you are not treated well, even though you're paid well, or you're not paid well, and you're not, well, you know, the intersection of all those things. So anyway, I had to go off on that for a little bit because I saw that recently. Sorry.
I mean, so we've laid out kind of what the problem is, and, you know, let's talk about what people of color actually need in the workplace. Do we want to get a sense of, oh, have I been sharing this thing the whole time? No, sorry.
Yeah, you just shared it again.
Okay, what's happening? So like, let's get into actually, Paula, what in your experience, what are the things that people of color actually need structurally and in their institutions?
Yeah, so just now I started talking about, you know, just having a statement, just, you know, having a commitment. And there's this kind of back and forth where folks will be like, I don't need a statement, I need action. And I think that that's true, but you should at least, I think a statement is a helpful exercise to get folks on board with what the actual mission is, right? To say, we do care. You know, I see so much wordsmithing around this, you know, should we use equality? What if we say trust? Do we really mean fair? Can they, you know, should we say retain? And in my mind, that is a great exercise because you want to understand where the commitment is. And starting with the leadership, you know, when I do work with organizations, I say, okay, great. I can come in and say, this is what I want you to say, but then it's not yours. What is it that you want to commit to? What can you commit to? And yes, it's okay to be aspirational in your space, right? Because if you're not, and you say that we are X, then folks who are inside are going to say, no, you're not.
Yeah, you have no trust.
So there's a balance there. And I think it does start with that kind of getting together. Where are we and how we're going to get there? So what do people of color need in the workplace? They need that commitment. So whether you decided to share it externally and internally, but it should be shared. It should be, an understanding that we're not where we want to be, but we are now focused and committed to getting to a better place than we are now.
Right. Admitting there's a problem. Like, please, just can we agree on that? But not always.
And so often not always. So often not always. I when I do the work that I do, I expect resistance. And when I don't meet resistance, I don't trust the information I've been given, because the way that people are set up is that means that when we are changes brought to us that we don't like it. Like, it's like, oh, what are you doing here? Are we comfortable here? And for many folks, it's been, this has worked for us for such a long time, but then they don't realize that us is exclusive, right? It hasn't worked for us. It's worked for the us that you have invested in. And often that does not include, at least not in full, people of color. So let me get back to your question. So recognition of impact, statement of value, commitment to fostering additional development, whatever that means. So I don't think many folks think that everybody has to be the CEO. That's just not realistic. But within the spaces that they're in, within the roles that they're in, are they maximizing, as organizational, are you maximizing the impact of their value proposition by saying, this is where you are right now, this is where we'd love for you to be, we see you in this space, that visioning and that commitment there, I don't see as often, because that's really not just hiring and the kind of worker stuff, it's really mentoring, it's really fostering, and that tends to happen along lines of affinity. If you have the majority of people who are in a space who are, of a certain demographic, whether that's, white or male or the intersection of the two, then the likelihood of you then having that really organic mentoring or organic thought process about people is less, unless you put a strategy in place, right? Unless you say, this person is here, they're important to us. What are they doing? How are they doing this? Are they great? If they're not great, how do we get them to great? Right. Where they see themselves? How do we see them in the scope of what we do? And that is why one of the questions was about professional development strategies, not just it being available, but what do they need? Because the great thing about diversity is that you cannot put the same result, like the same structure together for every person, right? You have to modulate your communication and your strategy for each person. And that's what makes it hard. That's what makes it really hard. And that's what I hear folks saying all the time. Well, how do we do that? But you do it for other folks. You just don't think of it as hard because it's not right. It's right. So
because you're like used to it, or you're not.
Yes.
Right. So commitment, recognition, and you talked a bit about development.
I did. Development, that's my sweet spot, right? So here's the thing. My business tagline is engage your hustle. Where does that come from? Not because I want everybody to be out like sweating every day, but it's because I think that no matter what role we're in, no matter what we do, there's a space, an elevated space that we can get to. There's a place where we can do that better. And so if you hired somebody because they are the greatest engineer in the world, awesome. How can we amplify that grade? How can you together, like, what do they want? What kind of training do they want? What do they need to get to that space collectively, right? That is a simple question that just does not get asked until you get to evaluation time, which at that point, nobody remembers, right? Or it's rushed, or it's late, right? And so that development piece is so inclusive of so many things. And I did a study once on exit interviews. And that piece, it was like, you didn't invest in me. So you hear that later on, it's like any breakup that you have, gosh, I wish you would have told me that.
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah.
You still didn't do it.
Right.
So development, I think, should be priority. And obviously sponsorship, I started talking about mentorship. I'm one of those people who I hate when you go to a panel and they're like, mentorship is different than sponsorship. Let me tell you the difference. I hate it. Because I'm like, don't we know already? We've done 25,000 panels of this. But because I don't want to make the assumption that we do, I'll just give it. Mentorship is like a guide through a space. I'm going to help you to avoid the landmines I've been on. Sponsorship is I'm going to carry you through and make sure that it's that I'm giving you, right, the sphere of influence that I have that helps you to elevate in that space. That's the difference in my mind. That if that happened more profoundly, people, not everybody, but people And people of color, 'cause that's what we're talking about, would be profoundly moved in spaces. They would. I know that
Yeah.
for sure.
Right. Yeah, but there's many gaps
Oh,
to
yeah.
get there. And that's super complicated. But yeah, I agree. There's been 25,000 panels on it. And yet I still am upset when people, because women of color are over mentored and we're under sponsored. Like that's just the truth and the reality of it.
Preach.
And it's not going to change until there's more doors open, there's more space given, and there's less opportunity hoarding by the people that already have the roles and the power and the say in the shareholder shares and all that.
What do you mean by opportunity hoarding, Cynthia?
Yes, actually, this is something that I didn't even learn until probably within the last 2 years. But what I'm talking about with opportunity hoarding is where the people that already have kind of the first dibs at something, or there's a chance to, I don't know, go up for a certain promotion or something. I've seen this happen with my friends, clients, and colleagues. But let's say you're up for a promotion. There's a colleague of yours who's, let's say, a white woman also going up for that promotion. And then when like there's this feeling of like that the white woman like deserves that or something, and like if she cannot get it, then like the person of color also should not be able to get it. So I've had clients who've had peers like go after them online, like on LinkedIn and things like that, and create HR issues to prevent the person of color from getting that promotion because they couldn't have it. So that's the idea of like the opportunity must be hoarded for that person. And yeah, it's deep.
I thought of it, so that's wild. I thought of it in another lens too, which is selfish sponsorship. That's what I call it. Which is you have that sphere of influence, but you're like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna parse it. I'm gonna parse it out, right?
Mhm.
And the way that I'm parsing is I'm gonna say if I have 100% in my sphere of influence, then 70% is gonna be in the place in which I feel comfortable. And here's like some percentages for over here for the folks who maybe don't feel comfortable, if I even do that. And it may be that, we're talking about the same-ish kind of thing, but no matter what, there's this unfairness that ends up being the detrimental impact that comes to people of color.
Exactly. It's a first mentality for the people who already have best access and generational knowledge and connections and resources and all that stuff. Because like it's been said a million ways, but power doesn't like to give up power, so yeah, Gina says I need to keep it all for myself mentality. It's a definite like scarcity. And thanks for Keisha for the opportunity hoarding or a how dare you complex. Yeah, very much on point for that. So that's one thing to look out for. But as far as other things that people of color need on top of everything that you laid out, Paul, and I hope people were taking notes because I feel like you were just literally giving them the formula for what to do in their organization, so I really hope folks are keyed into that. One thing that I wanted to point out, it's related to development of people and getting them to their career potential and career goals is investment. And I mean that in multiple ways: investment of time, investment of training, of opportunity, which we just talked about the hoarding. So like the opposite of that, trust and resources, including money. So that's another thing that people of color, frankly, really deserve and need and should be given already. It's a little bit absurd even to think about like we're talking about this kind of a basic thing, but I do want to point that out. And then another one is communication. So Paula, you've already kind of like woven in a thread of communication throughout the other things that we've talked about already. But to me, when I work both on the institutional consulting side and on the individual kind of employee or leader side, there's so much communication breakdown that it boggles my mind, frankly. And I think it's a function of people not feeling like they have time to make the effort or just not caring, so that's a really hard one. But I had this one institutional client and they were offering such great resources to support their people of color. And yet the people of color were not taking advantage of it. And even I was a little bit like scratching my head, like, this is actually really good offering that you have. Why aren't people availing themselves? Why aren't they signing up? What's happening? And then I asked to look at their internal comms and I looked at their messaging and I looked at their newsletters and their, internal emails and communications to people. And I was like, oh, This is why they're not signing up, because it was written by and for white folks. And so if I were reading that as an employee of color, I'd be like, that's not for me. You know what I mean?
And when we think about societally and institutionally, how the experiences people of color had, is that often the perception based on so many different things, but definitely including imposter syndrome, means that it couldn't be for me. So when I talk about the strategy that has to happen when you have resources that you want folks to take part of, yes, the lens, thinking about that lens of who is the audience for, how am I communicating it, and am I making an invitation to the resource?
Right.
Am I just assuming that there's going to be, you're going to pick your bootstraps and you're going to grab, right? And I always say that that's not just something that for people of color. That's you have to think, who might not hear this for them? Who do I have to reach out to and say, I would love for you to participate in this? And even if they don't, they then can say that they were not invited to that opportunity. But on the flip side, I'm sure you hear this, Coach Cheese Wise will say, I didn't think that was for me. I could do that. I had no idea that I could do that. And rewinding back a little bit more, there's also the piece of, if you have resources that have been given and provided, but you have not necessarily said, or I should say not resources, but maybe strategies that have been okayed within an institution. So I'll give the example of an ERG, an employee research group, or an affinity group. You say, oh, you got to go ahead and start one, you're good to go. Right? Okay, what's our budget? Hope and a prayer. Okay, that's not gonna work. And okay, well, how much time am I gonna be able to allot to this? As much time as you can, but then also don't forget to get all the work that you need to get done. And as a matter of fact, we don't really feel like bringing anybody else in from outside. So can you do all of these things? And don't forget that you have to talk about Women's History Month, Black History Month, Latino, like all the different things, right? On top of your work and not acknowledging it. And then you want them, right? So then the next step is make sure you think about your own professional trajectory. Like, that's important.
You too.
I'm exhausted even saying the list. Right?
I know. Yes.
And it's heavy. It's heavy.
Oh my God, the reburdening of people of color with like having to fix an institution's own racism and stuff, and then the contortions that are like done to put the problem back on you, and then also redouble blame you back for like how it's not fixed or whatever, and then be like at your performance review, like, oh, well, you didn't do all your actual work because you had me doing all this voluntary other stuff that I didn't have a budget for and had to just cobble together on my own. Like that is such a common story. It's so difficult. And psychologically, it's also very damaging to be like, you want me to do this, and yet I'm fully set up to fail. Like you're telling me one thing, but then the actions belie your words. That's a whole bunch of gaslighting. And then the fact that you have zero budget or a shoestring budget shows you that they don't actually care about you and what you're doing and your colleagues of color. So yeah, the invisible caseload that Agon is talking about.
Calling that same caseload, right? If you think about this as luggage, we've got a carry-on, that's our workplace stuff. And we probably have trunks and trunks of stuff that belong to what we have to experience outside. And then the walls of the workplace, whether you're virtual or not, they're all porous, right? They all overlap onto, right? So that when you have, the fact that we are experiencing what's happening in Ukraine right now, people are thinking about that. Right? Like that you're thinking about the last incident that happened in New York where another person who was Asian American, right? Like all of these things impact us. And so, and then it's like, well, I want to see your annual report from your affinity group that says all the things that we could put on the website. Did you take a picture of that?
Right.
And I'm like, hello. But we didn't talk about my favorite place of complaint. I wouldn't tell a complaint. I'll call it elevating an issue.
Okay.
And that's management.
Oh yeah.
So we often talk in the dynamic of leadership and then staff, right, individual contributors, et cetera. But the facilitation of good strategy, like strategy is developed both places, right? I want feedback here, and we also want to say this is what we're going to do from the leadership. And right in the middle, you have managers, and they can either be a barrier or a facilitator. And oftentimes, the folks who are barriers, unconsciously they do that in the way because they have not been trained in order or
Yeah.
supported, right, in order to
Right.
really help to support the folks who are working with them. And then the folks who are consciously barriers, right, those are the opportunity hoarders. Those are the folks who are saying, well, I can only give this thing to this person.
Yeah.
They make it that whatever your intention is does not match the impact. And so when you think about how you have to look at creating a strategy and then implementing resources, you cannot forget the middle manager, because
Yeah.
they maximize or they minimize your efforts.
100%. And I think about this a lot too, because I mean, I will give some credit here, because I do hear of more training of managers, whether they're new or they're a little bit into it nowadays than say 5-10 years ago. So I have seen some movement, but it's certainly not enough. Because there's a lot of just slapdash, like, we need someone to fill this role because that person just left in the Great Resignation or whatnot. And so now the whole team is destabilized, but like, you're good at what you do, and let's just put you there. You know, there's a lot of, it's a very complicated issue. But right, like the middle managers are incredibly important, because they can fully just, you know, you can have the best strategy, but then, you know, if it's not going through the conduit and they're not facilitating it, then it's all for nothing. And people still are quitting their direct bosses. They're not necessarily quitting a job. That's still happening. So yeah. And the chat is on fire and I love it. But so let's talk about a couple strategies that we do feel like work. And
You want to do the poll first?
Oh yeah.
I think the biggest problem is
the second poll. I can't figure out how to find it.
all right, hold on.
We need help on that.
Let me try.
Okay.
So that would be okay. So we're asking the questions. I want you to get yourself prepared for what you think the biggest issue is for within the workplace. We started talking about some of them, but let's see what your thoughts are around this. Here we go. So we're gonna go to the next question. Relaunch poll. Cancel that. I don't know what I'm doing. Just a minute. I shared those results. And now, all right. Gotta love it. Okay, do you see it now? Let's.
Are we gonna?
Wait, no, I think it just worked now.
Okay.
I think it's doing it now. Okay, yes. Now, please know that I'm also a tech genius.
I love it.
You should see the poll up right now.
There, yay.
Being virtual is that, you know what? As I said to Cynthia before we started, today's one of those days where you just understand that we are supposed to be in the space that we're in and to commune the way we are, and whatever happens is supposed to happen. So let's see what your thoughts are about this. What do you think the biggest problem is? And I especially want to hear if you think that we didn't hit them, like the other, definitely hit the chat and tell us what you think.
There's at least one person who's going to tell us in the chat, I think. This is cool. There's a lot of movement in this poll. So far, it looks like, oh, it's kind of tight, but not enough anti-oppression work being done in the organization across the board. Audits, training, difficult conversation. That one is ahead so far.
It's interesting because, you know, one of the options we have there is leadership isn't serious about supporting POC employees. And, you know, I think that a lot of folks definitely are serious, but they're not held accountable.
Yeah.
It's like a two-part thing where you like, you say it, I mean it, but then, you know, oh, we have to, you know, go into third core auditing or whatever the thing is. And then it falls to the wayside. And so making sure, oh, Gina, the individual work is so hard. It is. And, you know, we often talk about this dynamic. I love thinking about how we can, you know, be strong individual allies for each other, as well as to support folks who are in leadership who are traditionally white and male. To do work too, we have to all get uncomfortable. Like this doesn't happen. You can't. I say this every day. My therapist says, growth begins where comfort ends. Growth begins where comfort ends. And if you think that you can continue to grow and be better and be a more inclusive community and not have that discomfort and not get a little uncomfortable, it doesn't work. It doesn't. All right, let's share this. Wait, hold on.
It looks like it's stabilized.
Okay. Share results. Do you see it?
I do.
All right. So what do we have? So again, like Cynthia was saying, it's that not enough anti-oppression work, right? That's the work of it all, right? That continued piece.
No.
And then followed by leadership not being serious about supporting POC employees. Then lack of organizational strategies, sort of neck and neck. And then the middle managers and opportunity hoarding. And then the ominous other, which I can't wait to see what that means. Let's see what folks are saying in the chat. Like this is, I think we expected this, right? Like this is, we wanted to have this to be, for those of you who attended our initial kind of snippet, this is what we talked about that we did on LinkedIn Audio Innovation.
Yeah.
That we talked about that initial part of this, and now we wanted to get into some more of what we see and start talking about the strategies.
Yeah.
And so given that we have what we have, what do you want to jump into some strategies that you think help with this? Because I know that people are here for, they want to know what they can do.
I know. You already have gotten into a lot of it already, but we put together 10 strategies and solutions that we think are the ones that really need to be, that people need to start paying attention to and start implementing and executing on within organizations. So the number one is allocating or allotting or reallocating resources, money. We live within capitalism. That's what everyone equates with power and access, and that's what makes everything happen, right? Cash rules everything around you. So the companies and organizations have to figure out how to properly reallocate budgets, find the money from somewhere to put it towards the things that actually do support people of color. That's like a foundational thing. And that I want you all to think about that as we talk about each of the other individual strategies, because they are going to require either time, money, resources, or all three. So being able to do that and pulling from certain lines of business, being willing to shift things around, like that's where you really see if the commitment is real, like Paula was saying earlier. So yeah, like an understanding for leadership, understanding that reallocating your budget and doing that kind of deep work is going to make things look differently in your company, and it might cause things to really shift in the short term, and it might be really scary, but like this is what we need people to do, is that the growth starts at the end of comfort, where I just butchered that thing, but that piece of it, like we really do need leadership to put their money where their mouth is, take a couple of these like calculated risks according to your DEI strategy so that you can better support people of color in all the ways. So it could be a short-term, feeling of like, oh, what's happening, or a little destabilization changes the landscape for you, or your like annual report or whatever, but this is for the long-term game. Because if you do these things and you actually invest the money now, then in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to be head and shoulders above your competition when it comes to supporting and retaining your people of color, which is so valuable. I mean, I can't really even break down the dollar value of that, but like, that would be a whole other conversation. So that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two is that's one of your, I think, Paula, you're going to talk about number two, right?
Yeah. Yes. I didn't know if you were going to do a 1.2 on yours.
No, I think I was going to go on I was going to go on a thing about like how to actually give ERGs budget and things, but I feel like we talked about it earlier. So this is certainly related to that as well as other initiatives.
And I mean, we can't say it enough. Sorry. So it's like when somebody comes to you and says, hey, do something for free, it means that they're valuing. Right? If you choose to, that's a very different story than when they're demanding that you do so and burdening you with that. The second strategy is one that you might have guessed that I'm going to talk about. And we're not putting, these are not in order of priority. These are just things that we need to happen, is education and professional development. And so I'll start with the education piece. I started talking about this before when I said, where I see harm being done organizationally often is starting DEI work, starting work towards a specific demographic or group within your organization, and not giving people the tools to have those dialogues. If we already know that human beings, just as general, are not good communicators, and might, and again, I work a lot with lawyers, and I think we think that because we're paid by the word, that there's a lot of that we communicate well, and I find that where we think that we are doing a good job, we are not. And so understanding how to hear better, how to understand what people's pain points are, what are collaborative KPIs that can happen around organizational movement or around professional development is so important. And what is not happening is that people aren't prioritizing that educational piece. What are our groups going to be called? Why are we calling them that? Do we say people of color here, or do we designate each group? Do we do both of those things? It's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to talk about this, but you have to, because or else then that fear of making a mistake becomes so debilitating that you don't do anything at all. And then people are upset, and then you have it's a 360, that great resignation, because you're not saying anything. I think most people of color would rather you try and make a mistake and be understandably honest about the fact that you made a mistake and accountable to it than not to do anything. Right? So I hope that that's the case. We're all humans, we're gonna make mistakes, but we're like, well, I'm not gonna say anything. We're gonna do nothing about this because it doesn't work. You're not protected.
I know. And we talked about this example in the teaser LinkedIn audio time, which is when we were talking about how very frequently Black women in particular, their white bosses literally won't even speak to them. That's the extent of how bad this is. It's literally zero communication. And it's purely because of race, race and gender. So
I'll tell a really quick story. I had an employer back in the day that the person who was my direct boss was a white male leader, and he assigned a white woman to be his spokesperson for me.
Wow.
So it would be like, the meetings would be like, well, he said you should, and I'm like, what? And how dehumanizing that felt for me.
Yeah.
Not important enough to be spoken to directly, and how traumatic it was for me to have this person be the filter of this, of the leader's bias. I mean, but this is not something I'm one of many stories, right? Where that happens. And I think, the impact is so detrimental. And if that had happened to me now, but I felt afraid to leave. I didn't feel like I had agency to go. I felt like I had to stay. And that is hard. And that's hard. Yes. Anyway, get back to coaching, because I know we want to talk about that before we jump into questions. So this is our favorite.
I mean, in addition to the education, one piece of it is, and again, this is not in a vacuum. This has to be in tandem with a lot of real change that has to happen top down strategically, leadership and all of that. But coaching for individual POCs has been incredibly supportive to them, because when your workplace, if you're the only, or if you aren't, you're simply the first, that's also hard, or you're one of several people who have been clearly tokenized and you're constantly erased at work. Having that space where you have the trust that you don't have at work, where you have someone else external to the whole organization that has no real stake or agenda in your day-to-day, to be able to be your sounding board, to have the psychological safety with, and talk about your own goals and your success, and help you through the difficult times, that's just been invaluable to, I think, both of our our sets of clients. And we hear it all the time from, at least from the Embrace Change team, how life affirming, life changing, and game changing it is for people. Because if you are in a toxic, traumatic, racist, oppressive situation and you feel too scared to leave, sometimes having that external support to help you figure out the plan of how to safely leave, I mean, that could change the trajectory of your entire career. So I'm seeing more, and I'm heartened by it, more companies that are investing in bringing in a team of coaches who can, I'll just speak for ours. We have the cultural competence, and we are able to build the psychological safety for people of color, because we're an all people of color team. And so we can be there to be that support for employees. And even when folks leave, I've had companies hire us to manage a transition time. So the people are leaving anyway, or the whole org is shutting down or whatnot. It's good to do that, because the company reputation, the brand reputation thing that we talked about from before. So, again, that is one piece of this, but it can't be the only piece, right? We are not putting all the burden on individual people of color to bootstrap themselves up. So I'll leave it. I'll leave that one.
I think that's perfect, because if you make that investment, number one, when you just make an investment into someone, they feel differently, right? And the one piece about coaching that I think is important is that you can bring coaching and to have it as a support structure as opposed to a punitive or reparative structure. Right. And I think that perception, sometimes folks will think, oh, you coach, that means something's wrong. No, it could be, I coach, I'm investing in you because I think that you're fantastic and I want you to stay that way, and have that support. That's one. The flip side, of what Cynthia was talking about that I do often is I coach leaders, and particularly white male leaders, primarily, about how to navigate this. Have that sounding board that is neutral. I'm a space where I can say the wrong thing, you'll be okay. Right. And let's figure out how to navigate that, or let's talk about the fear that you have of giving feedback, or whatever the thing is. And the balance between those two coaching structures can be very supportive of any organization, right? Like you have you have to have leaders ready to go, even if they're not there, but to have that support structure. And then you have to have folks know they're invested in, and the continuity of that investment remains there as well. So
it's got to be all the way.
Yeah, we listed, this is 3, but we have 10. So the second part 2 of this that we're going to be doing on LinkedIn Live is going to be going through all of the actual things that we recommend. But the best part about it, I think, is this that you're seeing on the screen right now, which is that we're going to have an opportunity for you to ask us questions in advance of part 2 that will essentially shape a lot of what it is. So we will actually be responding to questions. So you're not using this right now, but we want you to use it. We'll send it in a follow-up email as well, for an anticipation of part 2, where we will be responding directly to. So think, if I could ask them, privately X question, that's your opportunity right now. This is anonymous. You don't have to put your name into it, just whatever it is that you want to ask, or any comments you want to make. But for now, right now, in the next minute, use the Q&A code, or sorry, not code, but the Q&A that's in the Zoom chat to ask any questions that you would like. If you would like to do so anonymously, you can do that, or you can put it in the chat, because we have the chat being monitored as well. And so
already some in there.
We have, for those who are siloed into an extra space, any tips to help move the leaders towards embedding this in the strategy? So I think one of the things that becomes an issue is when you see the opportunity to help navigate this, when somebody comes to you and says, hey, we really want to tap into your expertise and your experience here. It's to really up front, should you be able to have that voice to say, I would love to do this, with the understanding that I'm doing this to help you to get to a place where you either hire someone to do this or outsource this, that this cannot stay with me. And I found when people actually voice that in advance to say, I can do this in an interim time, or I want to do this to help you shape a scope of work, or an RFQ for somebody else, then that is there's boundaries put on it, so it doesn't become as hard.
I love that, because you're communicating sort of the expectation right up front. And or if you don't do it exactly at that moment, like the sooner the better, just to keep reiterating it. And if you're clear and consistent about it when it comes up over and over again, just keep bringing it up. I think that communicates how serious you are about that. There's another question about, has anyone found that women of color in senior leadership carry the same harmful cultural perceptions of women of color and perpetuate them in the workplace, causing exponentially worse harm? Yeah. I mean, listen, not all skin folk are kinfolk. It definitely, and I know sometimes I'm loose with my language too. I tend to say white folks, but really what I mean, and perhaps I should work on this, is that it really means anyone who has really internalized white supremacy culture and white supremacy in general. And that can include people of color sometimes. That is actually the reality. And I do think that it causes a worse, or at least different kind of harm, maybe feels deeper and more like sense of betrayal, because you think that person would be able to understand and not perpetuate. And also that person may be acting out as a part of a trauma response of what they experienced themselves. I mean, this stuff is complicated. I'm not making excuses, but
yeah. No, I think that you hit it right on the head, which is that the way that systemic racism works is that the people who we might look at as being impacted by it are impacted by it, not just as victims, but also as folks who perpetuate it as a place of safety.
Yeah.
Cynthia, can you stop sharing for a minute?
Yeah. Sorry.
So, and that's important to understand, because oftentimes we, obviously, if you are a person of color who is being impacted by someone who is a person of color, that's additional trauma on you, because you do assume that area of affinity should be beneficial to you as opposed to not. But I have found that navigating in a space of empathy, not necessarily empathy for them over you, but understanding that it normally is not just their, I'm an evil person and that's why I'm doing this. It's often their survival strategy that they have put on in order to navigate the spaces. And I find that the more that we can be open with each other to say, I've done this with other people too, where I've said, what you just did hurt me. Right? Like, and again, that's a risky space, because they might be like, well, I'm gonna hurt you some more, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that being said, I think that some folks who are impacted by this don't even see it sometimes, that they are the arbiter of that racism.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
there's another question.
Okay.
Renee, how do you get organizations from just checking off the box? So often it's endless events without meaningful change. Woo-hoo.
Introvert, like, less events, please.
So here's a lens that I can encourage folks to use. It's this: if there's going to be an event, how does that event align? If it's event focused, how does this event align with our strategy? Number one, that begs the question: is there a strategy, right? Number one. Number two, what is our intended outcome from bringing this content to our population? Why are we doing it? Right? Are we saying it's terrible to be a person of color in the workplace because we want the people of color? They already know that. So, right. So what is the intent from this? And is the content we're putting together going to foster additional conversation? My favorite strategy around this is, let's have Ta-Nehisi Coates come speak, whatever it is you decide you want to do. And then you have to have small group conversations. Get into the space where you're actually delving into the cultural shifting of the culture piece of it, as opposed to just, listening and being like, well, it still sucks this Black History Month, it still sucks this Women's History Month. My goodness, it's more about, now we understand the issue. We've looked at it, the studies that say this. What are we going to do about it? We can say, I love when leaders are like, we just talked about this, and now this is the strategy we're going to employ because we just heard about this again. Like, don't say you don't know because we just taught it to you. That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And there's so much more to be said, but I do want to respect folks' time too. And please know that, again, this is a part one of a two-part thing. We are going to, any questions we didn't get to, we will have that saved, and we can roll into the part two that is going to be on Wednesday, March 23rd in 3 weeks time, same time of day on LinkedIn Live. So we're doing all of the different platforms, trying to reach folks everywhere, have different vibe for each one. So, you have the bit.ly if you want to ask us more questions. You have our links to get in touch. There's a great resignation white paper that my company put out. That's a really great resource. And Paula's got also a specific law firms and Black history.
For those of you at law firms, I challenge you to read this and also send it to your leadership. And I have another idea for you. The link that we have to ask questions in advance, why not send it to some of your leaders and ask them to ask what questions they have, because it's anonymous. So there's no shame in it, and we can get to response. And that's also going to be, I think we'll have a recording of that too. So you can absolutely, yes, we're going to send out the recording. And we'll also, so listen, let's not stop the conversation here. We're starting this because we're passionate about this. We do this work, but we want to make sure that we are catalysts for you to continue doing this work too.
That was a great ending. So I'm just going to put up our end slide. Thank you, Paula, if I can find it. Oh, okay. Hold on. There we go. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for your excellent questions and all the lively conversation and chat. And we'll see you in 3 weeks for part two and get to some of these questions. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Bye. Wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.